Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the strangest, strictest, and most fascinating sisterhoods of the ancient world, the Vestal Virgins of Rome. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before we get into the vows, punishments, and astonishing lack of workplace benefits, we need to understand what the Vestal Virgins actually were. Because in ancient Rome, a place where people solved problems by sacrificing goats, consulting birds, or stabbing Caesar, the Vestals were considered the city's emotional support priestesses. If they were calm, Rome was calm. If they messed up, everyone instantly panicked as if Jupiter himself had filed a complaint. This wasn't just a religious order. It was Rome's most elite institution, run on the powerful combination of superstition, patriarchy, and theatrical fear. The Vestals weren't chosen because they wanted the job. They were chosen because Rome believed 6 small girls could hold the empire together better than the Senate ever did. And honestly, history proves they weren't wrong. The Vestals lived in the House of the Vestals, a gorgeous marble villa next to the Roman Forum. Think luxury estate, but with the constant threat of divine punishment. It had fountains, private gardens, elegant columns, basically the ancient world's version of a wellness retreat, except instead of yoga, you maintained an eternal flame that could never go out unless you enjoyed being publicly blamed for every bad harvest within a 50 miles radius. Their job was symbolic. Their presence was symbolic. Their purity was symbolic. Everything about them screamed, "Look at us." The gods still like Rome. They were walking billboards for divine approval. If a Vestal tripped in public, half the city interpreted it as a warning from the heavens, and the other half blamed the nearest politician. You would think the safety of an empire wouldn't hinge on a teenage girl's ability to walk in sandals. And yet, here we are. Despite the pressure, Vestals had privileges no other Roman woman enjoyed. They could own property. They had front row seats at events. They didn't need a man's permission to exist. Which in Rome practically made them superheroes. Touch a Vestal on your way to execution and boom, instant pardon. Absolutely wild power move. But beneath the marble, the gowns and the divine PR, these girls were symbols Rome both worshipped and feared. They were revered when things went well and blamed when things went wrong. Basically, the ancient world's version of customer service representatives. So before we get into their rules, duties, and catastrophes, remember this. The Vestal Virgins weren't just Rome's priestesses. They were Rome's anxiety medication. And Rome was always stressed. Becoming a Vestal Virgin wasn't something a girl chose. It wasn't a calling, a vocation, or a passionate career goal like becoming a gladiator influencer or a professional grape stomper. No, it was a state-sponsored kidnapping wrapped in religious ceremony. Rome called it captio, meaning the seizure, which is possibly the most honest name the Romans ever came up with. Imagine being a 6-year-old girl in a nice patrician household playing with wax dolls. When suddenly, the Pontifex Maximus, the head priest of Rome, shows up at your door with a group of men and says, "Congratulations, the gods want your daughter." No returns, no exchanges. The selection criteria were delightfully superficial. The girl had to be from a noble family. Physically flawless, Rome loved judging children, mentally sharp enough to obey commands, and soft-spoken enough not to start a rebellion. If she stuttered, limped, or had a single freckle that looked suspiciously like a bad omen, she was out. If she looked calm, quiet, and extremely kidnappable, jackpot. When a girl was chosen, her father didn't get to negotiate, bargain, or pretend he lost the child behind the market stalls. The state simply took her. Rome loved calling it an honor. But let's be real. Congratulations, your daughter will now serve the gods for 30 years and may be buried alive if she slips up is not the kind of news parents framed on the wall. The moment of selection was a spectacle. The Pontifex Maximus touched the girl and declared, "Te amata capio, I seize you, beloved." It's somehow sweet and horrifying at the same time, like being handed a cupcake with a spider in it. Then came the procession. The child was walked through the forum past crowds pretending to be a ruck instead of mildly relieved their daughter wasn't chosen. People whispered blessings while secretly thanking every deity available that their own kids had dodged the divine draft. The girl entered the temple of Vesta where the ritual haircut awaited. Her hair symbolizing her previous life was cut off and buried probably next to the remains of her social freedom. From that moment on, she was no longer a normal child. She belonged to the gods, the state, and a long list of terrifying expectations. Rome called this the greatest honor. The children probably called it something else. Quietly in their heads because speaking out was definitely not allowed. Once a girl was officially seized into service, the next stage was simple. She left her family. Forever. No weekend visits, no holidays, no "Mom, can you pick me up" messages. The Vests were Rome's most sacred employees. And Rome believed sacred employees work best when completely isolated from any support system. The moment a girl crossed the threshold of the Temple of Vesta, her old identity evaporated faster than a senator's moral integrity. She was now a daughter of the state, which sounds noble until you remember Rome's parenting style involved a lot of yelling, superstition, and public punishment. The ceremony itself was dramatic. She walked alongside the Pontifex Maximus, surrounded by priests, musicians, and enough incense to smoke out half the forum. Crowds gathered, not because they cared, but because ancient Rome treated every event like a spectator sport. Oh, look, little Julia got chosen. Good for her. And also, thank the gods, it's not my child. Once inside, the first order of business was a ritual haircut. Her long childhood hair was chopped off and then buried like a fallen hero. This symbolized her severing from the mortal world, dramatic but very on brand for Rome, a city that loved symbolism almost as much as it loved public executions. Then came the white veil, the plain robes, the new name, all reminders that she had transitioned into a sacred life. Rome basically rebranded her like a new product launch. New, improved, now with 100% more purity. The girl was then escorted into the house of the Vestals, a sprawling luxury complex that looked like a palace, but functioned like a divine boarding school. It had fountains, kitchens, servants, gardens, and elegant bedrooms. Everything except freedom. Think Hogwarts. But everyone is in detention forever. And while it lavishly protected its virgins, the house also trapped them. Forever. No weekend visits, no holidays, no "Mom, can you pick me up" messages. The Vests were Rome's most sacred employees. And Rome believed sacred employees work best when completely isolated from any support system. The moment a girl crossed the threshold of the Temple of Vesta, her old identity evaporated faster than a senator's moral integrity. She was now a daughter of the state, which sounds noble until you remember Rome's parenting style involved a lot of yelling, superstition, and public punishment. The ceremony itself was dramatic. She walked alongside the Pontifex Maximus, surrounded by priests, musicians, and enough incense to smoke out half the forum. Crowds gathered, not because they cared, but because ancient Rome treated every event like a spectator sport. Oh, look, little Julia got chosen. Good for her. And also, thank the gods, it's not my child. Once inside, the first order of business was a ritual haircut. Her long childhood hair was chopped off and then buried like a fallen hero. This symbolized her severing from the mortal world, dramatic but very on brand for Rome, a city that loved symbolism almost as much as it loved public executions. Then came the white veil, the plain robes, the new name, all reminders that she had transitioned into a sacred life. Rome basically rebranded her like a new product launch. New, improved, now with 100% more purity. The girl was then escorted into the house of the Vestals, a sprawling luxury complex that looked like a palace, but functioned like a divine boarding school. It had fountains, kitchens, servants, gardens, and elegant bedrooms. Everything except freedom. Think Hogwarts. But everyone is in detention forever. And while it lavishly protected its virgins, the house also trapped them. Guards patrolled. Doors were watched. You were free to roam the gardens, the corridors, the courtyard, but not the actual city that existed 5 feet away. The message was clear. You have everything you need except your previous life. Yet for many families, this was still considered a win. Their daughter was now untouchable, holy, and living better than most aristocrats. Parents bragged about it at dinner parties. Oh yes, our daughter's a Vestal now. No big deal. Just carrying the entire fate of the empire on her tiny shoulders. Leaving home was both a promotion and a life sentence. The Romans were excellent at designing things like that. Now that our newly minted holy child had been ceremonially disconnected from her old life, it was time to move her into her new home, the house of the Vestals. And let me tell you, this place was stunning. Marble floors, arched colonnades, sculpted fountains bubbling like a spa resort. Flowering gardens, elegant statues, rooms big enough to hear your own anxiety echo. On paper, it was paradise. In reality, it was a 5-star gilded cage run by priests who believed smiling too much could offend a goddess. Located right next to the Roman Forum, the house was perfectly positioned for maximum symbolism. The Vestals watched the heart of Rome and Rome watched them back constantly. Imagine living in a penthouse in Times Square except your lease agreement is stay here or face divine punishment. Inside the place was enormous. 3. Stories of living quarters, cooking rooms, storage chambers, ceremonial spaces, and hallways so long they looked designed for dramatic pacing. The central courtyard held a beautiful pool and garden where vessels could stroll gracefully while contemplating the weight of carrying Rome's destiny at age 8. Then again, even luxury loses its shine when you're not allowed to leave. Guards weren't standing at the doors, but the unspoken threat of breaking sacred rules was enough to make anyone behave. The Vests technically had freedom inside, but stepping beyond the complex without permission. Not recommended unless you enjoyed disciplinary beatings administered with the kind of enthusiasm only ancient Romans could muster. Still, compared to the average Roman woman who had the legal rights of a decorative vase, the Vestals lived like aristocrats. They ate the best food, wore fine garments, and had servants to assist them. Their rooms were clean, well-lit, and blessedly rat-free. A luxury Rome rarely provided. But the flip side, you lived with constant surveillance, divine expectations, and the knowledge that one mistake could cause mass panic, a mandatory purification ceremony, and several senators yelling about portents again. Every sound, every gesture, every late-night sigh echoed through a building that wasn't just a house. It was a symbol, a political tool, a religious monument, a place where childhood dreams went to be pressed into service like olives crushed for oil. In this marble palace, the Vests would spend decades learning to walk, speak, breathe, and exist with the level of calm usually reserved for statues. House of luxury. Yes, house of freedom. Absolutely not. The house of the Vestals was the ancient world's most beautiful reminder that comfort does not equal freedom. Once a young Vestal settled into her marble-scented prison of luxury, it was time for her main duty. The task Rome took more seriously than elections, omens, or the structural integrity of their bridges. Keeping the eternal flame burning. This wasn't just any flame. It wasn't a decorative torch or a cozy hearth fire. This was Vesta's sacred fire, the spiritual Wi-Fi connection of ancient Rome. If it stayed lit, Rome prospered. If it went out, Rome believed chaos would erupt instantly. Crops failing, armies losing, politicians making even worse decisions than usual. Basically, all the things Rome blamed on the gods when they didn't want to blame themselves. For the Vestals, this meant one simple rule. Do not let the fire die ever. They tended it day and night in shifts like tiny divine firefighters who were also expected to be spotless, silent, and serene. Imagine the pressure. You're 8 years old. Your sandals are too big. You're homesick. And you're responsible for preventing the fall of the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, your average adult Roman man couldn't even prevent the fall of his own toga. To maintain the flame, Vestals collected firewood, cleaned the hearth, and performed ritual offerings each day. They used sacred tools, sacred procedures, and probably sacred patience, considering they weren't allowed to roll their eyes even once. The whole process had to be done with reverence and grace. No rushing, no complaining, and definitely no puffing out the flame accidentally. And if the flame did go out, that was a catastrophe of divine proportions. The Vestal responsible would be whipped gently for religious reasons. According to the priests, though we all know Rome and gentle rarely occupied the same sentence, the city would perform emergency purification rituals, sacrificing animals, chanting prayers, and loudly wondering which god they'd offended. This time. But here's the twist. The fire going out wasn't always the vessel's fault. Sometimes storms blew through. Sometimes wind caught the smoke wrong. Sometimes the gods were just feeling dramatic. But Rome never blamed the gods. Oh no. Rome blamed the teenage girl with a broom and a job description longer than most senators' resumes. Still, despite the impossible stakes, the Vestals kept that flame alive for over 1,000 years through wars, plagues, coups, and whatever weirdness Caligula was doing that day. The flame endured because 6 terrified priestesses were very, very motivated not to disappoint a goddess with a track record of fiery vengeance. Before a Vestal Virgin was trusted anywhere near the sacred flame, she had to survive 10 full years of training. A decade-long crash course in ritual precision, public perfection, and the fine art of not accidentally offending a goddess who could smite entire cities over missing grain offerings. These first 10 years were essentially priestess boot camp, except instead of push-ups and obstacle courses, the girls learned how to fold their robes correctly, memorize hundreds of ritual instructions, and stand still for long periods without scratching their nose. This might sound easy, but consider Roman religion. Everything had symbolism. Everything had meaning. And everything had the potential to go disastrously wrong if you stepped too into the left. The curriculum included memorizing sacred chants without mispronouncing a single syllable. Learning purification rituals that involved water, fire, smoke, grain, or occasionally all of them at once. Understanding omens because no one wants to misinterpret a crow landing on the wrong side of a statue. Maintaining the sacred implements like brooms, knives, ladles, and whatever else the gods allegedly needed. How to keep your face neutral even when a senator starts ranting about comets again. Oh, and they also had to learn to read and write. A big deal since Roman girls typically didn't get a formal education. While other girls were being married off or practicing spindle work, the Vestals were studying law, ritual text, and the kind of philosophical questions that only emerge when someone forces you to sit silently for hours next to a holy fire. They weren't isolated, though. Senior Vestals acted as teachers, mentors, and slightly terrifying role models. Imagine a strict nun crossed with a political advisor, crossed with someone who's been keeping a flame alive for 27 years on 4 hours of sleep. These women took their job seriously because they understood what was at stake. The pride of Rome, the wrath of Vesta, and of course, the possibility of being held responsible for disasters entirely outside their pay grade. Training was strict. Mistakes were corrected instantly. And if a girl showed too much giggling, too much daydreaming, or too much interest in literally anything outside the temple, she was gently reminded through lectures, rituals, and the occasional ominous silence that she was now living a sacred life trademark. And sacred lives do not include hobbies. By the end of the 10-year training, the girls weren't just prepared. They were conditioned, polished into the perfect blend of calm, precision, and existential fear. Ready or not, they were about to enter the next decade, full Vestal duty, where mistakes carried consequences, and success meant no one noticed you existed. After 10 long years of training, memorizing rituals, mastering sacred silence, and resisting every urge to roll their eyes at omens, a Vestal Virgin finally entered her second decade, the 10 years of full official service. This was the era where everything counted. No more "I'm new here." No more "oops, I forgot." This was the decade where mistakes triggered cosmic consequences, or at least very dramatic Roman overreactions. As full Vestals, these women didn't just tend the sacred flame. They became the spiritual multi-tool of ancient Rome. Their daily duties were endless, precise, and mildly exhausting. Feeding the eternal flame, the main event. They gathered the purest firewood, prepared ritual offerings, and tended Vesta's flame with the seriousness of someone defusing a bomb. One wrong move and the entire city turned into a panicked Reddit thread. Flame went out, Emma. Ritual purification. Vestals prepared holy water, incense, salted flour, and other magical. Training was strict. Mistakes were corrected instantly. And if a girl showed too much giggling, too much daydreaming, or too much interest in literally anything outside the temple, she was gently reminded through lectures, rituals, and the occasional ominous silence that she was now living a sacred life trademark. And sacred lives do not include hobbies. By the end of the 10-year training, the girls weren't just prepared. They were conditioned, polished into the perfect blend of calm, precision, and existential fear. Ready or not, they were about to enter the next decade, full Vestal duty, where mistakes carried consequences, and success meant no one noticed you existed. After 10 long years of training, memorizing rituals, mastering sacred silence, and resisting every urge to roll their eyes at omens, a Vestal Virgin finally entered her second decade, the 10 years of full official service. This was the era where everything counted. No more "I'm new here." No more "oops, I forgot." This was the decade where mistakes triggered cosmic consequences, or at least very dramatic Roman overreactions. As full Vestals, these women didn't just tend the sacred flame. They became the spiritual multi-tool of ancient Rome. Their daily duties were endless, precise, and mildly exhausting. Feeding the eternal flame, the main event. They gathered the purest firewood, prepared ritual offerings, and tended Vesta's flame with the seriousness of someone defusing a bomb. One wrong move and the entire city turned into a panicked Reddit thread. Flame went out, Emma. Ritual purification. Vestals prepared holy water, incense, salted flour, and other magical ingredients to keep Rome spiritually disinfected. If a single grain spilled the wrong way, priests would instantly assume the gods were furious. Not at themselves, obviously, but at the nearest Vestal. Guarding the sacred objects, Rome kept its most important legal documents, wills, treaties, and political secrets in the care of the Vests. Because nothing says confidential like giving your private documents to a group of terrified virgins living under religious surveillance, participating in public rituals. Vestals attended ceremonies, festivals, and sacrifices with perfect composure. Imagine watching a bull's sacrifice up close while maintaining a serene expression, knowing that if you even flinched, someone would say, "The gods disapproved." Maintaining purity, not just physical purity, symbolic purity. Their emotions, gestures, clothing, posture, breathing, and probably their thoughts had to be immaculate. If a Vestal looked sleepy, people whispered. If she sneezed during a ritual, entire temples panicked. Being Rome's walking good luck charms. If a Vestal touched a condemned prisoner on his way to execution, even accidentally, he was immediately pardoned. Imagine tripping in a forum and accidentally freeing a murderer. And through all this, they were expected to embody calm dignity. No slouching, no complaining, no "I'm tired of holding cosmic responsibility." Just the quiet understanding that they represented the stability of Rome, a city that was rarely stable. These 10 years were the peak of their power and the peak of their pressure. The Vestals were honored, revered, and held to impossibly high standards, which is Roman code for "we trust you, but if anything goes wrong, it's definitely your fault." After 20 years of training, performing, panicking, not panicking, and maintaining a flame that absolutely refused to go out on its own, the Vestals entered their final decade, 10 years of teaching. This was the era when they transitioned from terrified apprentices to terrifying mentors. The ancient equivalent of a senior employee who has seen everything, survived everything, and now watches newcomers with the subtle judgment of a marble statue. Teaching wasn't optional. Once a Vestal reached her third decade, she became responsible for training the next generation of small, anxious recruits. This meant she now had to explain rituals she had once cried over, demonstrate techniques she had once messed up, and maintain the kind of serene authority only achieved through many years of standing perfectly still next to a fire. A senior Vestal's schedule included mentor duties. She guided the novices through complicated rituals, taught them the sacred chants, and supervised their daily chores. The goal: prevent the children from accidentally summoning divine wrath or knocking over anything important, which in Rome was everything, enforcing rules. This was the era when she finally got to be the one giving ominous warnings like, "Do not run near the sacred flame. Do not touch that scroll. It's older than your ancestors. Do not breathe too loudly during purification rites." Somewhere deep down, she probably enjoyed this part. Correcting mistakes. Mistakes during training were normal until a senior Vestal appeared behind you with that stare. You know the one, the look that says, "I've kept this flame alive for 27 years, and I will not let you ruin my record," teaching ritual mindfulness. Not the modern kind involving crystals and deep breathing, the ancient Roman kind, which meant memorizing 50 procedural steps while holding a grain offering at precisely shoulder height. Imparting survival tips. These weren't written anywhere, but every senior Vestal had a mental notebook full of wisdom like, "Never trust a priest who says this won't take long. If you hear thunder during a ceremony, pretend it's auspicious. If a senator asks if the gods are angry, the correct answer is always no." Passing on the fear above everything, senior Vestals taught the novices as the sacred lesson every Vestal eventually learned. You are vital. You are honored, and you are one badly timed sneeze away from an omen. By the end of this decade, a Vestal had completed her divine career. She had been student, servant, spiritual worker, and now teacher. A full circle forged in fire, discipline, and 30 years of absolutely no romantic scandals. For all the pressure, fear, and flame-ending terror, the Vestal Virgins enjoyed privileges that made the rest of Rome's women look like background characters in their own lives. Rome loved to say it honored the Vestals, and for once, the empire wasn't exaggerating. These priestesses lived better than most senators and considerably better than the average Roman man who struggled daily with public baths, bad wine, and toga malfunctions. The power of the Vests began the moment they stepped into the public eye. They moved through the streets with a dignity that even the highest magistrates respected. Ordinary women had to be accompanied by fathers, husbands, or whichever male relative hadn't wandered off yet. Vestals. They walked independently. In a society where women were legally closer to household furniture than citizens, the Vestals were practically superheroes. They were granted front row seats at games, an honor usually reserved for Rome's elite men. When a Vestal took her seat at the Colosseum or circus, crowds automatically quieted just a bit because if a Vestal was present, the gods were watching, too. The symbolism was powerful, and Rome adored symbolism almost as much as it adored public entertainment. Their influence wasn't just ceremonial. Vestals could pardon prisoners. If a condemned man on his way to execution happened to touch a Vestal, even accidentally, even if he tripped, he was instantly granted his freedom. Imagine having the power to save a life simply by existing in the wrong place at the right time. That's the kind of divine authority politicians could only dream of. They also enjoyed financial freedom. Vestals could own property, write wills, and manage their own wealth. While other women needed legal guardians for transactions as simple as buying a cup of wine, Vestals were signing contracts and acquiring estates like seasoned professionals. Rome treated them like legal adults while treating everyone else like confused toddlers. Even the law bowed to them. A Vestal's testimony in court carried extraordinary weight. Not because she was infallible, but because Rome assumed the goddess Vesta herself guided her honesty. No pressure, of course, just the expectation that your every word echoed divine truth. Yet all this power came with an unmistakable edge. The Vestals were honored because they were essential, and they were essential because Rome believed catastrophe lurked behind every corner. A Vestal's privilege was balanced by the knowledge that she was always one misinterpreted expression away from becoming an omen. They were revered. They were feared. And perhaps most importantly, they were watched by the city, by the priests, and supposedly by Vesta herself. If there was one rule Rome cared about more than the sacred flame, it was the Vestal's chastity. The Romans treated this vow with the kind of seriousness normally reserved for declarations of war. Or calculating the omens of a slightly confused chicken. A Vestal virgin had to remain utterly, impeccably, profoundly pure for 30 years. Not because Rome cared about her personal morality, but because it believed her chastity was directly linked to the stability of the entire empire. Rome, unsurprisingly, never explained how one woman's love life could topple a civilization of 1 million people. But logic rarely slowed down Roman religion. The theory was simple. Vesta was the goddess of hearth, home, and the sacred flame. Her priestesses embodied her purity. If a Vestal broke her vow, that purity cracked, and Rome's metaphorical household collapsed. The city acted as if the Vests were holding a cosmic Jenga tower together with sheer willpower and chastity alone. The expectations were merciless. Vestals were surrounded by guards, by rules, and by the ever-present suspicion that somewhere out there a god was watching them with divine binoculars. They could walk freely in the city. Yes, but freedom isn't freedom if people are scanning your face to detect even the faintest hint of romantic scandal. A Vestal could trip on the street and half the forum would whisper, "She's in love." Followed by immediate Senate discussions on possible omens. Roman men, of course, faced no equivalent vow. A senator could have 3 wives, 12 mistresses, and a suspicious number of household attendants, and nobody battered an eye. But if a Vestal so much as made meaningful eye contact with someone during a festival, the priests began sharpening their shovels. It was a double standard so blatant even ancient historians rolled their eyes. Maintaining chastity wasn't just about avoiding physical relationships. Vestals had to avoid situations that might look suspicious. A private conversation, dangerous; a smile lasting half a second too long, concerning; standing too close to a handsome equestrian, treasonous. The Vestals weren't just celibate. They were living symbols of purity, expected to float through life like divine statues who occasionally performed fire maintenance. And the worst part, there was no second chance. One accusation, founded or not, could destroy a career, a reputation, and quite literally a life. Rome held the Vestals on a pedestal so high that the only direction left to fall was catastrophic. This was the paradox of being a Vestal virgin. Absolute honor balanced on the edge of absolute ruin. If a Vestal virgin broke her vow of chastity, Rome didn't treat it as a private matter, a personal mistake, or even a scandal. No, it became a full-blown cosmic crisis. Romans believed that the purity of a Vestal wasn't just symbolic. It was the city's spiritual life support system. So, if a Vestal's vow shattered, the solution had to be equally dramatic. And because Rome never did anything halfway, they invented one of the most theatrical punishments in ancient history, burying her alive. Yes, alive. Because apparently the Romans took the phrase overreaction as divine instruction. But there was a twist. Rome prided itself on being civilized, which meant they could not legally execute a Vestal. She was, after all, a sacred woman belonging to the goddess Vesta. So they created a loophole so large and so morally questionable that even a Roman lawyer would squint at it. They placed the vessel in an underground chamber furnished with a bed, a lamp, water, and a small amount of food and sealed her in. Technically, they weren't killing her. They were simply placing her somewhere she would eventually die on her own. Rome always finding creative ways to justify its drama. The ritual began with a public trial. The accused Vestal stood before the Pontifex Maximus, usually trembling beneath layers of symbolic purity and sheer terror. The priests asked her a series of questions, not so much to seek truth, but to check a box on the ritual checklist. After all, once Rome smelled scandal, facts became optional. The accused Vestal could proclaim innocence until her voice broke. But Rome, in its superstitious frenzy, rarely cared. A bad harvest, a solar eclipse, or an unfortunate pigeon omen, could doom her as easily as actual guilt. The procession to the execution site was a grim parade. The Vestal was placed in a closed litter so no one could see her, and no one could risk accidentally touching her. Heaven forbid a doomed priestess accidentally pardoned a criminal on the way to her grave. The people watched in silence because nothing warns a society to behave quite like watching its spiritual icons punished with geological enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the man involved, assuming he existed, was whipped to death in the Forum, a sentence Rome performed with disturbingly casual efficiency. In the end, the burial alive ritual revealed everything about Rome's relationship with the Vests. They were essential, revered, and terrifyingly disposable the moment a superstition turned against them. If you think modern politics thrives on scandal, ancient Rome would like to raise you one Vestal Virgin. Nothing electrified the city quite like whispers that a Vestal had broken her vow. It didn't matter whether it was true, partly true, or invented by a senator having a slow news week. The mere hint of impropriety sent Rome spiraling into moral panic faster than you can say auspicious omens. The Vestals unfortunately lived in the most politically weaponizable position imaginable. They were at the intersection of religion, superstition, and public paranoia. A perfect storm for accusations. A Vestal didn't need to actually do anything wrong. She just needed to look slightly stressed during a ritual or sneeze at the wrong moment, and half the Senate would interpret it as divine displeasure. The other half used it as an opportunity to ruin someone's career. Politicians loved Vestal scandals. They were the Swiss Army knife of political tools, useful for distracting the public, eliminating rivals, or convincing everyone that Jupiter hated your opponents more than he hated you. If a powerful man wanted to bring down an enemy, accusing that enemy of seducing a Vestal was the ancient version of dropping a nuke. After all, who could argue with the gods? The public played along with shocking enthusiasm. Romans adored drama. If a Vestal was suspected of wrongdoing, crowds filled the Forum, whispering interpretations and inventing symptoms of divine anger. A slightly crooked lightning bolt, a bad harvest, a crow sitting on the wrong temple roof. Clearly, the universe was sending hints. And clearly, those hints pointed directly at the Vestal in question. The city turned into a live-action conspiracy forum. And the trials, oh, the trials, they weren't trials so much as performance art. The accused Vestal stood there as priests recited rituals. Senators delivered dramatic speeches. And the public stared with the intensity of people watching a gladiator match they didn't realize was actually about religion. Evidence was optional. Vibes were enough. If Rome felt unlucky that year, the Vestal was guilty. Even innocent Vestals weren't safe. Some were sacrificed to restore public confidence, others to satisfy political vendettas. And a few simply because Rome believed disasters couldn't possibly be random. Someone, preferably a woman with a spotless record, had to take the fall. In the end, Vestal scandals reminded everyone of Rome's deepest fear, chaos. And nothing soothed that fear quite like blaming a young woman who had dedicated her life to preventing chaos in the first place. For a civilization that prided itself on engineering, military strength, and the ability to conquer continents while wearing skirts, Rome could be astonishingly fragile when it came to one thing, the sacred flame going out. You would think a city with aqueducts, concrete, and a whole military-industrial complex would handle a simple fire mishap calmly. Absolutely not. The moment the eternal flame flickered into darkness, Rome reacted like someone had unplugged the god's life support machine. When the flame went out, and yes, it did happen more often than the priests wanted to admit, the city plunged into instant spiritual crisis mode. People in the Forum gasped dramatically. priests scrambled like chickens fleeing a thunderstorm. And senators immediately blamed foreign influence, political rivals, or the ominous shape of last night's clouds. Because in Rome, everything had meaning, even accidents. The Vestal responsible usually froze in horror because she knew exactly what was coming next. A sudden, very public reminder that Romans did not believe in mistakes. Everyone had a theory about why the flame failed. Some blamed divine anger. Some blamed poor ritual execution. Some blamed the girl's posture, breathing, or aura. No one blamed the fact that maintaining a fire in an open-air temple during a windy Mediterranean night is frankly kind of difficult. The penalty for letting the flame die was a beating, not a severe one according to Roman priests. But Roman priests were not known for their gentle approach to discipline. This punishment was carried out in a darkened place supposedly to preserve the Vestal's dignity. Of course, being whipped in a small dark room was hardly dignified, but at least Rome liked to pretend. Meanwhile, the rest of the city performed massive purification rituals to reboot the spiritual system. Animals were sacrificed, prayers were chanted, incense burned until half the forum smelled like a divine barbecue, and a new fire was lit using the purest means available. Often sunlight focused through a magnifying glass-like device. Apparently, the gods preferred solar energy. The whole ordeal was not just a religious emergency. It was a political performance. Rome needed to show the gods and itself that it was still in control. A RIT flame meant hope. A punished Vestal meant accountability. A completed ritual meant stability had somehow been restored. But beneath the drama, everyone understood the truth. The Vestals were human. The flame was fickle. And Rome, for all its grandeur, could be undone by something as simple as a gust of wind. After 30 years of serving the gods, tending an anxiety-inducing flame, performing rituals with flawless precision and living under the perpetual threat of burial, the Vestal Virgins reached a milestone that must have felt like divine salvation. Retirement. The moment a vessel completed her 3-decade service, she was finally free to rejoin the mortal world. A world she hadn't lived in since childhood and was probably half convinced no longer existed. Retirement transformed a vessel into something rare in Rome. A woman with complete legal independence. She could own property, make contracts, manage finances, buy land, sell land, sue people, and most shockingly, live without a male guardian overseeing her every move. In a society where even wealthy matrons needed permission to sneeze in the general direction of a marketplace, former Vestals were walking anomalies of freedom. Many Romans sought retired Vestals for marriage, believing their purity and divine connection brought good fortune. After all, what better way to bless your household than marrying someone who had spent 30 years staring into a holy fire while maintaining perfect posture? Wealthy men lined up, hoping to secure a wife who symbolized cosmic approval, stable luck, and a reduced likelihood of household curses. But here's the twist. Most retired Vestals didn't marry. After decades of complete autonomy and spiritual authority, the idea of suddenly reporting to a husband must have sounded about as appealing as returning to the burial chamber they had narrowly avoided. Imagine being free after 30 years and then immediately forfeiting your independence because Publius wants someone to manage his villa. No thanks. Those who did marry sometimes struggled to adjust. Life outside the house of the Vestals was noisy, unpredictable, and full of people who didn't understand basic ritual etiquette. Ordinary citizens made mistakes constantly, touching sacred objects incorrectly, ignoring omens, failing to maintain pure thoughts during festivals. A former Vestal might witness one household mishap and nearly perform a purification ceremony on instinct. Still, retirement had its joys. A former Vestal could walk the city without being watched like a divine barometer. She could enjoy festivals without worrying that her smile was being analyzed for cosmic meaning. She could go to the market and buy a piece of fruit without considering its ritual symbolism. In short, she could live like a person, not a myth. Yet the public never fully let go of the aura surrounding retired Vestals. People still whispered blessings when they passed. Children stared in awe. Some citizens believed that even in retirement, a Vestal carried a spark of the sacred flame within her. And maybe she did. But now, at last, it was hers. For nearly 1,000 years, the Vestal Virgins stood at the center of Rome's spiritual identity. Through civil wars, assassinations, plagues, imperial scandals, and emperors who really should have been supervised, the Vests kept the flame burning. They were the quiet constant in a city that never stopped yelling. But everything in Rome, even the most sacred traditions, eventually collided with history's favorite hobby, change. By the late 4th century CE, the Roman Empire was shifting dramatically. Christianity was rising with the enthusiasm of a new startup backed by divine venture capital, and traditional Roman religion was steadily losing government funding. Old gods were out, new doctrines were in. And suddenly people looked at the eternal flame and said, "Do we actually need this?" A dangerous question in any era, but especially in Rome, where people once sacrificed animals because Mercury was having an off day. Then came Emperor Theodosius I, a man whose life mission seemed to be deleting Rome's pagan past like outdated files on a dusty divine computer. In 394 CE, he issued the decree that ended the Vestal order. The Temple of Vesta, once the spiritual heartbeat of the city, fell silent. The sacred flame which generations of terrified priestesses had protected with the dedication of overworked interns was extinguished forever. The reaction was mixed. Traditionalists were horrified.